In the last two sessions, we have been considering tropological usage, which is one of the main ways in which our usage can differ from common standard linguistic usage. Our usage is tropological when we use words to mean, refer to, or describe something other than what they are usually used to mean, refer to, or describe. And the different types of tropological usage, or tropes, are defined in terms of the relationship between what words are usually used to mean and what they're being used to mean. A second main way in which we can differ from common standard usage is referred to as figurative usage. And instances of this kind of unusual usage, this type of unusual usage, are referred to as figures or schemes. Schemes being the older term, it was common in the Renaissance, but has really fallen out of usage. And so we will go with the term figures to refer to instances of figurative usage. In order to understand this kind of unusual usage, let's imagine that you want to buy an apple that is red. And you go to the corner store and say, "I would like an apple red, please." Now, the person at the counter might look at you and just wonder why you're speaking in this way. Since there's something a little unusual about speaking in this way, isn't there? What is unusual about it? Well, are you using the word apple to mean something other than an apple? Or red to mean something other than redness? No. So it's not tropological usage. Nevertheless, the usage is still unusual in some basic, obvious way, isn't it? In what way? Well, it's unusual. What is unusual is the order or arrangement of words. Most anglophones would say, "I would like a red apple," rather than "I would like an apple red." That is to say that in this situation, anglophones usually or commonly place the adjective before the noun. But in this case, you are placing the adjective after the noun. And that is why this usage would qualify as figurative usage or as a figure. Our usage is figurative when we arrange or order our words in ways that are different from the ways in which we usually arrange or order them. Now, these days, many people do not distinguish between tropes and figures, and they lump all kinds of unusual linguistic usage under the general category of figures or figurative language. I think this is crude, and it fails to acknowledge a distinction, the distinction between trope and figure, that has been drawn in Western tradition, literary tradition, philosophical, and traditions of education and rhetoric. That distinction between trope and figure has been drawn in those areas from the ancient Greeks onwards. And I think drawing this distinction is one little thing that helps us to describe the language of poetry with more precision and to understand it in more depth. So we will maintain this distinction. And in this session, we'll identify a dozen or so of the figures that I think are quite common in English poetry and are useful in relation to our project of describing and understanding poetry in English. In relation to each of the figures, I'll give the traditional name. I'll describe what is unusual about the particular arrangement or order of words. I'll give an example or two of each figure and briefly comment on the different effects each figure can have. I've included a document in this lesson that provides the terms, definitions, and examples we'll look at for each figure. And there's also a quiz if you want to practice identifying and naming figures in passages of English poetry and prose. You can please do that quiz. So here's the first figure. The first figure is from Milton's Sense and Agonistes, a dramatic poem that begins like this: "A little onward lend thy guiding hand to these dark steps, a little further on. the blind enslaved Samson speaking in this way. Now, what is a little unusual about his language here is that consecutive clauses begin with the same words, a little. And this is the distinguishing feature of the figure called anaphora. In this instance, I do think it goes to give us a sense of just how depressed and down the enslaved blind Samson is. He finds it difficult to continue to move forward. And so he begins the sentence a little, onward lend thy guiding hand to these dark steps, has a pause in it, and then begins again, a little further on. The figure, which is common in English poetry and drama, doesn't always have this effect, though. Consider, for example, these lines from Shakespeare's play, Richard III, in which Lady Anne is cursing Richard III, who has murdered her father-in-law, Henry VI, and her husband, Edward. So she curses Richard by saying, "Oh, cursed be the hand that made these fatal holes. Cursed be the heart that had the heart to do it. Cursed the blood that let this blood from hence." Right? In this case, conspicuous lines, all beginning with the same word, cursed. And I think clearly the effect is that we have, it conveys this, anaphora conveys her hatred and her bitterness, her intense hatred and anger in the face of the man who has murdered her husband and father-in-law. But notice the anaphora, this figure can also have a very different effect, as it does in Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. There's a little passage from Tintern Abbey. "How often darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir, unprofitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee." Wordsworth, right here, the anaphora, several clauses beginning with the same words, how oft, how oft, how often, giving us a sense of Wordsworth's emotion, but this, in this case, the emotion is of gratitude. How often have I turned to thee, O river Wye, in order to get some consolation from joyless daylight. Now, epistrophe is really the inversion of anaphora and is displayed in these lines from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. "I'll have my bond," Shylock insisting on getting his bond. "I'll have my bond. Speak not against my bond. I have sworn an oath that I will have my bond." Right, a series of clauses or sentences all ending with the same, a series of consecutive sentences or clauses all ending with the same word, in this case, the word bond, going to really bring home to us the determination of Shylock to have his bond. But the effect, the effect of that one particular figures can have different effects. Here's another epistrophe from Marlowe's wonderful play, Dr. Faustus. Faustus says, "And what are you that live with Lucifer?" And Mephistopheles, who does live in hell with Lucifer, says, "Unhappy spirits that fell with Lucifer, conspired against our God with Lucifer, and are forever damned with Lucifer." That's pretty grim, isn't it? In part because of the epistrophe, a series of consecutive lines all ending with the same word, in this case, Lucifer. Now with anadiplosis, again, we have another type of unusual linguistic usage where what is unusual is the order of words. In this case, a kind of repetition. In Milton's great pastoral elegy, Lycidas, Milton might well have written the following line: "Lycidas is dead before his prime." But instead of writing that, Milton writes the following line: "Lycidas is dead, dead before his prime." And this type of unusual arrangement of words is referred to as an anadiplosis. It's where you have one phrase or clause or line ending with a word or words, and then those words are repeated at the beginning of the next clause or line or phrase. Think about the difference between the common way and the figurative way. We would more commonly say Lycidas is dead before his prime, but Milton writes Lycidas is dead before his prime. The anadiplosis, I think, slows it down, makes it heavier, makes that word dead more forceful just by virtue of the repetition. And I think goes to establish that tone of sadness and lamentation that is notable in this poem. But consider this one from Hamlet. You may be familiar with his with that famous speech from Hamlet in which he's thinking about death and suicide. He does not say to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. Rather, he says to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, right? One line or phrase ending with to sleep, and the next one beginning with those same words, by repeating those same words, to sleep. Again, I think it slows it down, it makes it heavier. In this case, I think it goes to enhance our sense of Hamlet thinking seriously. He's not in a rush, he's serious. It's deep, serious, intense thought. Another example from Paradise Lost, God emphatically stating the penalty man must pay for disobeying him by way of an anadiplosis. He with his whole posterity must die. Die he, or justice must. Yes, rather grim, rather firm, grim, punishing by virtue of the anadiplosis, I find. Now, with hyperbaton, we have a simple inversion of common word order. Here's another example. It can be handy. I do think sometimes hyperbaton is simply a handy way of meeting the demands of various meters and rhyme schemes, but it can do a lot more than that. For example, to return to Milton's Lycidas, Milton writes, "Thee, shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves with wild thyme and the gadding vine overgrown, and all their echoes mourn." Now, that is an unusual word order because the verb comes at the end. A more common word order would be, the woods and caves and all their echoes mourn thee. What's the difference between the two? Well, I think by virtue of the hyperbaton, by this inversion of common word order, putting the verb at the end, I think the utterance is held up, it's suspended in a sense, until we get to the verb, which is at the very end of the sentence. And I find that it all comes down with more weight and force, the act of mourning. It all comes down with a thud on the verb mourn. But the effect of hyperbaton can also be one of high formality, grandeur, and majesty, as I would say it is at the opening of Paradise Lost. You know, Milton does not command his muse in the way we might usually do so, in the way we usually issue commands with the imperative verb at the outset of the command. You know, sing muse of man's disobedience, or muse sing of man's disobedience. It's not that. Rather, it is of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse. I think the effect there, hyperbaton, because the verb again comes at near the end of the utterance, and the effect here really quite different from the effect of the hyperbaton in Milton's Lycidas. Consider the following expressions. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Now this one, right, it really is unusual because you have an A-B-B-A sequence, right? Heaven, hell, hell, heaven. an unusual type of repetition of words in a claim, in a sentence or utterance. And we get the same kind of thing, but with quite a different effect again, right? That sense of sort of enchantment and something menacing and kind of paradoxical, difficult to understand when we have the witches producing an antimetabole with fair is foul and foul is fair, right? Fair, foul, foul, fair. This type of thing, this type of sequence can occurs in a lot of different contexts and has, again, a wide range of different effects. Here's another one from a very different situation, the JFK speech. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. You know, something, in this case, I would say it's something catchy. It's memorable, right? Why do people walk around with this in their head? Why do so many people recognize this? Well, there's something catchy, memorable, witty about it. And that is in part because it is an antimetabole. Sometimes the term chiasmus is used to refer to this figure as well. Now, the next one, aposiopesis. Quintilian, one of the ancient theorists of rhetoric, observes that this figure often indicates passion or anger. And indeed, that's what it does in one of the standard examples of this figure in Shakespeare criticism and rhetorical studies at large. King Lear, when Lear is just so furious with his daughters who are being mean to him, and he says, "No, you unnatural hags, I will have such revenges on you both that all the world I will do such things. What they are yet I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth." Aposiopesis, a kind of interruption of an utterance, often leaving the utterance incomplete and resulting in a moment of silence. Aposiopesis, the traditional name for that type of unusual utterance or sequence of words. When Julius Caesar was talking about one of his great military exploits, did he say, "I came, and then I saw, and then I conquered"? Well, according to some of the ancient authorities, this is not what Caesar said. He said, "I came, I saw, I conquered." That is to say, he does not use any conjunctions between clauses, independent clauses, as we often do. Right? There are no conjunctions, no and, but, or, for, nor, yet, the 6 conjunctions of English. None of them occurs in his utterance. And because he speaks in this way, he produces a figure. We can describe his language as figurative language, in particular an asyndeton, no conjunctions in between clauses or statements. And I think the effect here, clearly, it gives the utterance a sense of authority, terseness, strength, and force. Here's another one. Sometimes the term breakologia is used to refer to the figure where the items in the list are not clauses or sentences, but single words. So we have that type of figure, whether we call it asyndeton or breakologia. It's a fine point, but from Milton, "One spirit in them ruled, and every eye glared lightning, and shot forth pernicious fire among the accursed, that withered all their strength, and of their wonted vigor left them drained, exhausted, spiritless, afflicted, fallen." Whole series of adjectives, a list of adjectives, but there's no conjunction joining each item in the list. Now, the figure, the figure which is a contrast to asyndeton is polysyndeton, and that's just where you have one of the 6 main conjunctions of English, and, but, or, for, nor, yet, inserted in between the items of the list, and does have quite a very different effect from asyndeton. Paradise Lost again This is after Adam and Eve had disobeyed God and they're not feeling too good about it. Love was not in their looks either to God or to each other, but apparent guilt and shame and perturbation and despair, anger and obstinacy and hate and guile. I think the polysyndeton here slows it down. It makes it heavier. Really have the sense of Milton piling it on, right? The heaviness of all of these, right? We get a sense, the polysyndeton goes to give us a sense of the terrible burden of feeling and passion that Adam and Eve must bear as a result of disobeying their God. But this figure can have a very different effect, as I think it does in Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. Here, I think it gives the impression of fullness and plenitude and richness. So Wordsworth in this poem writes, "And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, and a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man." Right? Here, a conjunction "and" being used to join items in a list, and I think giving a sense of plenitude and richness. Note the delicacy and tenderness of these lines from a short poem by Byron. "She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies." It's delicate, balanced, and chanting. In part because we have a parallelism here. Two or more consecutive lines, clauses, or phrases that have the same grammatical structure. Here in the second line, we have adjective, noun, cloudless climes, and starry skies. The figure is common in Tennyson's wonderful poem, The Lady of Shalott. We get lines like this, another parallelism: "Willows whiten, aspens quiver." Right? A sense of balance, control, delicacy. Lovely, right? Lovely. But again, this particular figure, parallelism, can have very different, can affect utterances in very different way. Here, think, for example, of Brutus's great speech from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where he's trying to justify his participation in the assassination of Julius Caesar. "As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him." We do get some anaphora here, as you may observe. Consecutive lines all beginning with the same word, as. But also notice the grammatical structure of all four lines is the same. A particular grammatical structure is being repeated from line to line to line. And that extended parallelism, I think, goes to make Brutus sound reasonable, right? It's very ordered, measured. It comes across as being reasonable, in control, authoritative, stern, even just. Sometimes we have a special type of parallelism, as at the opening of Pope's Rape of the Lock. "What dire offense from amorous causes springs? What mighty contests rise from trivial things? I sing." The poem goes on. A kind of parallelism here. Notice we have in the first line, adjective, noun, second line, adjective, noun. So kind of parallelism, but notice that the meaning of dire is contrary, if not opposite, to the meaning of amorous. The meaning of mighty is the opposite of the meaning of trivial. So when you have this type of parallelism, where the meaning of one of the terms is the opposite of the meaning of one of the other terms, we have a particular type of parallelism, namely an antithesis. In this case, I think it goes, right, it can be very sharp, witty, bright, even comic, as it is in these lines from Pope. But it can also be, serve to express other other feelings, passions, states of mind, as it does, for example, in that fantastic opening speech, highly figurative opening speech from Shakespeare's Richard III. The whole, much of the speech, the opening 13 lines of it is really structured as a single anaphora. Now is the winter over. Now our brows, now. But we also get antithesis here. Now our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hum up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures, right? Stern alarms really meaning the opposite of merry meetings, dreadful marches meaning the opposite of delightful measures. So an antithesis that goes to really right off the bat, giving us a sense of Richard's linguistic brilliance, his wit and intelligence, but also I think his bitterness. You can feel his bitterness coming through these lines, in part as a result of the antithesis. Now, ploce is a fairly simple figure, perhaps not so unusual or uncommon, but nevertheless, often traditionally identified as a figure just where you have a repetition of a particular word in a clause or sentence or line. As we have Richard, staying with Richard III, this hand which for thy, speaking to Anne, trying to get Anne to forgive him for his murders. This hand which for thy love did kill thy love, shall for thy love kill a far truer love. Repetition of the word love, really going to give us a sense of Richard's his deviousness, using the word love to mean different things, the same word to mean different things, repeating the word, very persuasive a display of his rhetorical prowess, trying to persuade Anne to forgive him. Different effect in Milton's Paradise Lost when God is describing the angels, some of whom obeyed and some of whom fell. He says, freely they stood who stood and fell who fell. Repetitions of stood and fell, going to that sense of God's sternness. He doesn't mince words, very, very terse type of expression. And repetitive, that repetitiveness going to God's sternness and authority, I would say. Now, one last one, I think this is number 12. Apostrophe, I have some problems with classifying apostrophe as a figure, but that's the standard classification, so we'll just go with that for now. Just where you have the speaker addressing, often turning away from talking to one thing and addressing something else, a person, a thing, which is often absent. This is a very common, powerful figure in English poetry, one that is, again, can have a wide range of different effects. In Milton's Lycidas, there are many apostrophes, such as the one with which the poem opens. Yet once more, O ye laurels, and once more, ye myrtles brown. Milton begin by addressing the plants associated with elegy, lamentations of the dead, laurels and myrtle. And that apostrophe going to establish throughout the poem, I think, a tone of sadness and melancholy. But in Macbeth, which is full of apostrophes, I think the effect is very different. Lady Macbeth, come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, invoking the spirits to make her stern and tough and to enable her to participate in the killing of the king. And Macbeth, a great apostrophizer, come, sealing night, scarf up that tender eye of pitiful day, and with thy bloody and invisible hand cancel and tear to pieces that great bond which keeps me pale. Macbeth's typical apostrophe, his turning to the night and asking it, addressing it, asking it to make him strong in order to commit the terrible deeds he's going to commit. A very powerful figure that goes to express a wide range or display a wide range of emotions and passions in the speakers who produce that figure. So there's a dozen figures, a dozen unusual arrangements, sequences, or orders of words. Please see the document in this session that contains the names, definitions, and examples of each of the figures. Again, if you'd like to practice identifying and naming figures and thinking about how they work, please have a look at the quiz on figures, which I've included in this class. Now, in the next session, we will use this vocabulary to describe and understand Wordsworth's poem.